Have you ever had a musician that you got into because you really liked one of their albums? That was me and Canadian rapper Chaos. Back in 2004, I knew his songs like B-Boy Stance, Crab Bucket, Men I Used to Be, and Love Song, with the last three songs played on the radio, getting me pumped every time I heard them. Around the next year, I got the album the songs came from, which was Joyful Rebellion, and it was a staple in my high school years, especially since I was in grade 9. The album exposed me to different genres outside of hip hop and R&B. There was soul, reggae, funk, acoustic, and rock. This was the album that made me the person who I am to this day. Joyful Rebellion is my Illmatic. It is my favorite album ever made. So 2 years later, Chaos released his third album, Atlantis Hymns for Disco, and I thought it was okay. I thought there was a little too much going on, since every track had different genres playing. It was like that in Joyful Rebellion, but this time it was taken up to 11. There was hip-hop, R&B, soul, jazz, country, throwback to 50s rock and roll. It was all over the map. I thought it was okay, but still thought it was good enough for a few repeat listenings. And over the years, my opinion changed for the better. Atlantis was not supposed to be immediately like, in my opinion. Or maybe I put too much pressure on it because his last album was so good. And I realized that Atlantis is my It Was Written. It helped me write in ways during school that I never had with Joyful Rebellion. It goes to show that time helps opinions change. We, as humans, never have the same thoughts throughout our lives. What we disliked as kids, we might like as adults, and vice versa. But let's go to an album that I bought a bit before I bought Joyful Rebellion, and a follow-up that came years later. We were all surprised when we heard Feel Good Inc. for the first time. That evil laugh, the smooth bass line, the creepy vocals, and the nice rapping, all those made one of the most unique songs of 2005. Was this a rap song? Was this a rock song? What was this virtual band that was new to a lot of us who didn't hear of them back in the early 2000s? This was something we've never really heard before. This was during a time when R&B was dominating the charts, as well as the mainstream popularity of snap music. Emo was also getting popular as well, so hearing the first single off of Demon Days was a major change in this lighter and softer era of music, some emo notwithstanding. Hearing this song threw a lot of people off, eventually in the best way possible, and the album it came from is pretty much the same. It was dark, it was depressing, the music was a game of genre roulette, exactly like Joyful Rebellion. It was a great time despite its depressing subject matter. Of course, the album avoided the sophomore slump. Massive acclaim, commercial success, eventually going multi-platinum in several countries, a hit song that has been on multiple video games and commercials. And again, the songs on the album were just amazing, if somewhat underrated. And so, when Plastic Beach was released in 2010, we could not wait for what we would hear. Some of us tried to lower expectations due to the last album setting a high benchmark. So when Stylo, the first lead single from Plastic Beach, came out, it was good. It was no Feel Good Inc., but it wasn't supposed to be. It was a lot more synthy and electro, a wee bit lighter than Feel Good Inc., which was a sign for what was to come on the album it came from. So when Plastic Beach came out, most people did not expect what was going on because, like I mentioned with Atlantis Hymns for Disco, there was a lot going on. There were some of the same qualities of the last album, but there were some changes on it as well. I mentioned that Demon Days was released during a time when music had a lighter and softer edge to it. Plastic Beach did the same 5 years later, and it was something people did not expect, to the point where some people did not care for it, causing it to sell much less than the previous Gorillaz albums. Looking back, this album marked a crossroads, for better and worse for the band, and for the people behind it. It marked everything that was right and everything that was wrong about the group and their future. So why is Plastic Beach more loved now than it was back in 2010? There are some factors that go into it. The first factor may have been the timing of when the album was released. The reason why Demon Days was such a success was, again, because it was released at a time when music had a lighter air to it. It was completely different. Plastic Beach was different as well. However, it was released at a time when the music was softer and lighter, in a different way, a lot more poppy, and those types of songs were everywhere. People like Rihanna, Flo Rida, Katy Perry, Bruno Mars were fairly popular due to the catchy output of songs. So when Plastic Beach was released, it kind of blended in the mainstream pop scene, and/or it was way too different from what was popular. With a mixture of genres, it kind of turned people off with the amount of things that were going on with many of the songs. It was a bit overwhelming. In the 2000s, the world was fine with genres crossing over. Rap rock, new metal, post-hardcore had their moments to shine, and that was what made Demon Days successful. But 5 years after that album was released, music went more poppy and genre crossovers were kind of a thing of the past. Pop was a lot more simplified, which is not a bad thing, but it made the release of Plastic Beach possibly an example of wrong place, wrong time. And with the eccentricities of musicians in real life, a cartoon band playing music may have been the last thing on people's minds in mainstream media. Or it would be if the band were more focused, which may have been another problem, which was part of another problem. On their first 2 albums, the cartoons were shown as much as the music was played. You can feel the band playing these songs. On Plastic Beach, however, it was a little bit more detached. This era of the band was where the cartoon was beginning to take a back seat, and the songs slowly started sounding like a Damon Albarn project, not a Gorillaz album. This caused a bit of tension between Damon and Tank Girl co-creator Jamie Hewlett. On top of that, this phase in their career turned into an ambitious mess. The style of music video, while good, went massively over budget, and the album's world tour was mixed. As Albarn would say, it was incredible fun, I loved doing it, but economically it was an absolute disaster, pointing to the fact that the show would barely break even. And there's also the fact that EMI, the record label that they signed with, was already having financial trouble and had to pull the plug before the saga could be completed. It also explains why the band has not had the ambitious storylines ever since this album. And after all of that, the group released a small scale of The Fall before going on a hiatus and coming back with 2017's Humans. And speaking of Humans, there's another reason as to why Plastic Beach wasn't commercially successful. The guest musicians were beginning to take over. Now the band's first 2 albums did have guest features, but they never really took over the whole song. When you heard them, it was still undeniably Gorillaz. With Plastic Beach, however, it slowly started to sink in that this was a project that Damon wanted to work with people, as opposed to it being a genre-busting, interesting album. There is nothing wrong with working with people you want to work with, but it eventually will get a little crowded if you're not careful. Plastic Beach is still a great album, but the problem with guest musicians were slowly starting at this point. If you played songs like White Flag, which had De La Soul on it, or Sweepstakes, which had Mos Def on it, you would not think that they were Gorillaz songs. You would think that they were a De La Soul and a Mos Def song, respectively. Not bad songs, but you wouldn't think of them as Gorillaz songs. And the music is still interesting to get into and listen to many times, as opposed to being lifeless at times, and some songs just seem to blend together. So despite all these issues, the album was a commercial success, but music tastes change, and it wasn't as successful as other albums, nor an album that people wanted at the time. Thankfully, the album was vindicated by history, and it went from merely being positive to people saying it's their favorite album. In the end, we all don't grow up with the same ideas. Our perspectives, our minds, our bodies, our priorities, our tastes have all changed. We may like the same thing at the moment in the same way we did like when we were 5, but that is a rarity. We can express ourselves in what we wear and what we do, even if it's for a certain period of time. Time not only heals all wounds, but it could sort ourselves out. Plastic Beach is a good example of time aging it like a fine wine. It may not be for now, but as we age, the taste will settle and we'll like it. Some consider it better than Demon Days, and it is easy to see why. It's an adventure that has many layers to it, and with many repeat listens, the journey will keep going.